Alright, you should be getting plenty about the genus Australopithecine from your reading. There are a few things I do want to repeat and maybe add on to what reading you do have. So first, let's just do a little quick overview of Australopithecines. They were around between 4.2 and 1 million years ago. The name Australopithecus means southern ape, and although there is no ambiguity whether or not these Australopithecines are more pongid or are pongids, which is apes, they are actually a firm step towards hominids. There is, as you have seen from your reading, disagreement for later classification. Where we classify them, how we classify them, is still a subject of debate. So, um, again, as you know from your readings, Australopithecines come from South as well as East Africa. They have relatively small brains and large faces, and these large faces house large teeth, especially their molar teeth. And all Australopithecines are bipedal. Now, how bipedal, how well they can move around on two legs, whether it's the same as us, is still probably not there. They're not as great as walking around on two legs, but they are pretty good at it. They are habitual. We also see a reduction in the brow ridge. What do I mean by this? Well, let's look at this a little bit closer. So here you see a brow ridge of a chimp. Here you see an Australopithecine, and here's a human. This is another trend as we go up our evolutionary tree. We see this reduction in the brow ridge. Now, it's not so much of a reduction in the brow ridge, but that the space the brow ridge occupies is slowly overtaken by this great increasing cranial capacity. So here you see us, we have these ginormous heads, this big brains housed inside our skull, and this room that this brow ridge used to occupy is now being taken over by this cranium. All right, let's go on and talk about Australopithecus platyops. And Australopithecus platyops is so different in its morphology. It's so off the regular Australopithecine path that some researchers have suggested that it should be called its own genus called Kenyananthropus. Now, how different it is in its morphology has been debated. Some have suggested that it's because of plastic distortion. Plastic distortion, if you remember, is a process that happens in fossilization, where as a individual, this Australopithecine, for instance, is dead and buried, layers and layers of sediment slowly building pressure on top of it actually distort the fossil that we find. So what we're going to be looking at in the fossil record isn't exactly what existed 3.5 to 3.2 million years ago. So maybe this difference in morphology is not because of a difference in morphology, but because of plastic distortion. How are we going to find out? Well, we need a little bit more evidence of platyops, and we don't have that yet. All right, let's really quickly visit Australopithecus afarensis. Now, I know your book goes over each one species that we found out, each of the members of this of our family tree, and I really am going to hold you responsible for those. But I just want to talk about a little bit more about afarensis. Now, afarensis, if you recall, was Lucy, and because Lucy this stirred so much hype, a lot of researchers went back and searched for more, and the next year, 1975, they found 13 to 17 individuals. Now, 13 to 17 individuals of Australopithecus afarensis tells us several things. One, that they lived in groups. So these were social hominids from 3 million years ago. And we also found out that there was a degree of sexual dimorphism. What does this tell us? Well, sexual dimorphism means that there was some sexual competition. Although this is still being debated because of the small canines, we see sexual dimorphism in a lot of afarensis. All right, really quickly want to talk about tongue child. You should be familiar with tongue child from the Radiolab episode, so I'm not going to spend too much time. I do want to talk about the Piltdown hoax. This is actually in one of the books, but not in the other one. So what the Piltdown hoax basically was is a time where we thought we were looking for our ancestors. We knew that we had that there was evolution that led us to where we are today, but people suspected that what separated us initially from the apes, where we diverged from the apes, was because we grew big brains. We were smarter. So what people were looking for was an ape-like creature with a ginormous head. and voila, they find it. They find a skull in Piltdown in the early 1900s with a ginormous crane, a ginormous skull, and an ape-like mandible. Now, this causes a lot of hype. A lot of people start writing papers, doing research. We found our ancestor. We found what led eventually to man. And it wasn't until almost 40 years later, in the 1950s, where it, the Piltdown skull was looked at a little bit closer, and it was revealed that it was actually someone had taken the mandible of an ape and put it onto the skull of a human by filing down the molars, changing the coloring, and made it look like a fossil. Now, there's a few lessons to learn from this. One, that if you are expecting to look for something in particular, sometimes you miss out on finding other things that were not what you were expecting to find. So you should always, as far as a scientist, as far as an anthropologist, go at any inquiry with an open mind. Second thing is, there was a lot of actual discoveries made of our ancestry, such as tongue child, such as other members of the Australopithecines, and these discoveries weren't given much attention at all because people believed they had already found what was our ancestor. So just keep this in mind about the Piltdown hoax. All right, moving on. The robust Australopithecines. Now, the reason I want to visit the robust Australopithecines is because, again, researchers argue on how to classify them. Because they are so different, because they're so robust, because they are very prognathic, which means that they extend out, their faces extend out quite a bit. They have the sagittal crest. Researchers have argued where we should classify them. Some have suggested that we call them the robust Australopithecines, such as the author of your book. Other researchers have suggested that we call them Paranthropus. So instead of Australopithecine, some call these robust Australopithecines Paranthropus. So where in your book it says Australopithecine Ethiopicus, I have a hard time pronouncing these words too. We or I say Paranthropus. So we have Paranthropus Ethiopithecus and Paranthropus robustus and Paranthropus boisei. Now, something to finish off with really quickly is Paranthropus robustus, although the name suggests robustus, isn't the most robust Paranthropus or Australopithecine. That would go to boisei. But unfortunately, robustus was discovered first, so robustus takes the title and boisei gets boisei. All right, have a good time, day, night, afternoon, whenever you listen to this.